by far. In the census of 1870, 21% of all the people living in Wheeling were foreign born. 21%. That percentage now of foreign born, let me see if I can find it here, 1.7%. In the state, 1.1%. 1870, 21%, and of those, 58% were German. It's overwhelming. Put it another way, of the entire population in Ohio County in 1870, over 12% were Germans. German newspapers. Let me give you some of the examples of what I'm talking about here. Certain Wheeling enterprises in the late 19th and early 20th centuries were distinctly and overwhelmingly German. Brewing, baking, meatpacking, tobacco. The city directory of 1886 shows the impact of the Germans on the economy. Of the 6 brewers, 4 were German. Of the 25 bakeries, 19 were German. Of the 61 butchers, 48 were German. Of the tobacco manufacturers, of the 38, 21 were German. We taught German language in the schools. Okay? This little paragraph, this comes from an article that I did back in about 1994 called The Faces of Wheeling. The German cultural influence was also important, especially in music. There were various singing societies, we talked about those. There was a conservatory of music, there were bands and orchestra. The Opera House Band, back in the 1880s, played for commencement exercises at West Virginia University and at West Liberty Normal School. In the Intelligencer, that's a local newspaper, June the 10th, 1892, they had a story about the Wheeling musicians who went to Morgantown to play at the commencement. And here's the quote. The Opera House Orchestra returned from Morgantown University commencement exercises yesterday morning. Professor Spell says that, notwithstanding the heavy rains, the town was very dry so far as the musicians were concerned. On account of the last election, in which they outlawed liquor, the musicians could find nothing to lubricate their mouthpieces. Well, we amended the West Virginia Constitution. This is a wonderful state. We have one of the few states that has no referendum or recall if you want to get rid of somebody, or we don't have that. We have a state that has a policy if the standing governor dies or moves on or gets another job, who's the new governor? Well, we think it's this guy. When's the election? Well, we're not sure when the election is. Okay? But in 1912, we passed the constitutional amendment in the state of West Virginia to outlaw alcohol. What were they thinking? Okay? What they were thinking is who's identified with alcohol. You know, those parish priests are drunk every Saturday and Sunday. And those Irishmen, they drink. And you ever been to an Italian house that didn't have a bottle of wine? And a Polish place that didn't have some vodka? Am I right? Okay. Or some Croatian farmer who, when you walked into the house, what's on the table? There's some bottle of alcohol. Okay. My grandfather used to make his own wine, made his own beer. And I will tell you this, Prohibition may have been there. Didn't stop him. Didn't stop him. In 1912, 53 of the 55 counties voted a 2-to-1 margin to outlaw alcohol. Hardy County barely opposed it, but in Ohio County, overwhelmingly against it. Okay? Now, why would it be so overwhelmingly opposed in Ohio County, but past Brooke and Hancock? Because Brooke and Hancock had not yet gotten substantial populations of Eastern and Southern Europeans. It was starting. Had that vote come a little bit later, just 5 years later, it probably would have lost in Hancock County and probably lost in Brooke County as well. Because the changes, remember, at the beginning of the 20th century, there is no Weirton. There is no Follansbee. There is no Newell. All of those cities developed as a result of industrialization. And all of them suck in these Europeans that make this area different. Now, looking at it from the perspective of 2010, we're not different at all. But trust me, when the Javersaks came in, you know, when my grandfather came in 1902, I remember he's telling me the story. He was a coal miner for a while, and the guy sitting next to him said, "Are you hunky?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm hungry." He said, "No, I didn't ask if you were hungry. I said, are you a hunky?" He said, "I know what a hunky was." Now, if you don't know what a hunky was, that was just a derogatory term for some Eastern European. Like Dago, like Kike, like Pollock. Okay? We had all those wonderful phrases.
What did hunky mean?
You know, I'm not quite sure. It's one of those things that you grew up with, and you wonder what that does mean. Okay? It's like kike. Where does Dago come from? What?
Without papers.
Yeah. Well, I mean, all the derogatory terms that we have for people. Okay? Spicks. Greasers. Krauts. But only Kraut after World War I. There was no reason to be derogatory about the Germans in Wheeling, because if you walk down the streets in Wheeling 100 years ago, you would hear German. It bothers people today to be in malls and hear some foreign language. That's not American. Guess what? Yes, it is. When William McKinley ran for president in 1896, his campaign literature was published in more than 40 different languages. Because he knew that if he wanted to reach Hispanics, if he wanted to reach Russians, if he wanted to reach Poles, if he wanted to reach Hungarians, he had to do it in their languages. And today we say, well, that's not American. Hey, excuse me, you've forgotten your history. My father's generation, my father would talk about somebody, he always referred to that person by his ethnicity. The Polish guy who lives down the street. The Italian guy's over there. You know, he's a Serbian guy that I worked with. It's just the way it always was. Everybody knew you by your ethnicity. He lived in, if you lived in Steubenville, there's Polish Hill in Steubenville, over there on 7th Street. Okay? There's a little, well, if you've ever been to Follansbee, all of Follansbee was a little Italian town. Okay? But not every place in Brooke County was Italian. Then you would have, you would have ethnic neighborhoods. There would be places that would be overwhelmingly Greek. There would be some, because when you moved into those places, you wanted to move into some place that was friendly. So that if you went to certain neighborhoods in South Wheeling, you might have a concentration of Germans. You might have a concentration of Poles. There might be a group of